All right, sad news out of Texas. A lot of you have messaged me about the B-17 versus P-63 mishap during the Dallas Air Show. The NTSB has released their aviation investigation preliminary report. We're going to go over that and talk about some things that I noticed. Obviously, the investigation is still ongoing, so this is kind of a tweener. I always talk about I don't like to speculate when an investigation's going on, but there were a couple things they pointed out that it raises some questions that I've had. So let's take a look.
3, 2, 1, flight off.
Okay, so this is the Aviation Investigation Preliminary Report, Dallas, Texas. The accident number is on there, November 12th at 13:22 local. That's Central Time, 1:22 p.m. With aircraft 17227 Charlie, and then 6763 is aircraft 2. I don't know how the NTSB does it in law enforcement when I do an accident report. Like two vehicles crash. Vehicle 1's always the one at fault. Vehicle 2 is the one that's usually not, or not the majority of the fault. So I don't think that's how they do it here. I just thought it was interesting, simply because, you know, they might do it on how many fatalities there were, but it's just an interesting thing. So it was a B-17 versus a Bell P-63, 5 fatal in aircraft 1, 1 fatal in aircraft 2. They were operating on Part 91 air show or race, and then Part 91 general aviation race. So the narrative on November 12, 2022, 13:22 Central Standard Time, Boeing B-17 Golf airplane and a Bell P-63 Foxtrot collided in midair at the Dallas Executive Airport. Post-impact fire ensued. The pilot, co-pilot, 3 crew members on board, and the pilot of the P-63F were all fatally injured. There were no ground injuries reported. Both airplanes were operated under the provisions of Title 14, Part 91 for Wings Over Dallas Air Show. So here's the layout. P-63 was number 3 of a 3 ship. So he was the wingman, essentially. So he wasn't leading the formation. He was aft in this train that you'll see here in a minute of historic fighter airplanes. And the B-17 Golf was lead of a 5 ship. So he was in front of this train of historic bomber airplanes. According to the recorded audio for the airshow radio transmissions and NTSB data, Airboss directed both formations to maneuver southwest of the runway before returning to the flying display area, which was the designated performance area, which, by the way, I'm not showing the video again. It's horrific for the families. There's no reason to keep showing this. You've seen it. You can Google it if you want to see it again. He directed the fighter formation to transition to a trail formation, fly in front of the bomber formation, and proceed near the 500-foot show line. So we don't know distance as far as trail. The P-63, the mishap aircraft, was number 3. So he's at the tail end of this line, keeping sight of 1 and also Dash 2. So he's looking for 2 other aircraft in this. The bombers were then directed to fly down the 1,000-foot show line. The 500-foot show line and 1,000-foot show line were 500 feet and 1,000 feet, respectively, from the air show viewing line behind which the audience viewed the air show. So they were going to be offset laterally, but not altitude-wise. So 500 feet off, 1,000 feet off. So they had 2 different show lines, 2 points that they were going to. In which case, the bomber was farther away, which makes sense, right? Fighters smaller, harder to see, put him closer to the crowd. Bombers bigger, harder to maneuver, put them farther away from the crowd. There were no altitude deconflictions briefed before the flight or while the airplanes were in the air. When the fighter formation approached the flying display area, the P-63F was in a left bank and it collided with the left side of the B-17 Golf just after the wing section. This is the part I don't get, and this is the most telling thing of the whole thing. So, you know, I've flown fighters my whole career, F-16s, F-18s, T-38s, and T-38s are probably the most deconfliction intensive fighter I've ever flown. As a mission commander, we did a lot of large force exercises where you would lead, you know, 12, 14, 16 other aircraft and mini block altitude. So we all deconflicted our altitude so that in the event of lost sight with somebody else, or the event of, you know, we didn't have global SA, which you never do, you could always go to your get well altitude, your mini block, stay there and know that you had typically 1,000 feet, but usually 500 feet. fact that they didn't have altitude deconfliction is concerning. And I think eventually they'll find that this is partly to blame for it. But so what ends up happening, based on what you see in the video, based on what this is saying, more than likely Dash 3 was fixated because they were now maneuvering. He was in that left-hand turn. They were maneuvering to show line. He's looking for number 2 and number 1. He's belly up. So he's in that left turn. The B-17's coming from his right. It's a low-wing aircraft. Doesn't do the belly check, which, sometimes that's just a human factor thing, right? You're not always on your A game. And runs right into him. So he's staring off, looking this way as he's making the rejoin happen. I've done, thousands of rejoins. Sometimes you do a belly check, just make sure nobody's there, especially if somebody should be there. So probably a momentary loss of situational awareness to know that, hey, I'm number 3. The B-17 gaggle is on its way, and they're going to be somewhere around behind us. So, if I rejoin, if I'm a little aft, I could be in their formation. So momentary loss of situational awareness, possible. Lack of altitude deconfliction, probable. That is, I don't know how air show's done. I've never flown in an air show, but in everything I've ever done with formation, flying fighters, altitude deconfliction is critical. It is something that we brief. It is something that, because you can never maintain global situational awareness. You can never always know where every other aircraft is, wherever other formation might be. And especially as a wingman, you're responsible for keeping track of the other aircraft in your formation. It's tough to then look over your shoulder while you're trying to keep sight and know where they are. And I think what happened was momentary loss of situational awareness, didn't realize where he was in relation to the formation behind him, and no briefed altitude deconfliction. So no briefed get well altitudes, and they're all co-altitude going to the same piece of sky. And unfortunately, this is the result. So that is pretty telling, and that is pretty tragic. I mean, that's something that's, Dave, VFR, they'll talk about the weather here, but beautiful day. Both airplanes broke up in flight, impacted terrain and grassy area on the airport property south of the approach end of runway 31. Fire ignited. B-17 Golf exploded upon ground impact. The pre-fill was 320. Documentation, you can see the picture. Both airplanes were equipped with NTSB. They recovered some Garmin 496 stuff, but it didn't record any information. So here's the information. B-17G and the P-63, it was VMC, so visual meteorological conditions prevailed. The winds were out of the north, about 14, gusting to 18. 10-mile visibility, beautiful day, sky clear, ceiling and as Noonan says, CAVU, ceiling and visibility unlimited, and they all thing. So really very tragic, something that you don't want to see. Everybody in the B-17, everybody in the, that one pilot, they were all very experienced. I don't think they were military trained, but they were all very experienced pilots. A P-63 guy probably, I looked at his resume. He'd done a lot of commemorative Air Force stuff. He had a ton of flight hours, but most of it was heavies. So does that ask the question, whether you need to be fighter trained to have, that ingrained in you? I don't know. I think a civilian pilot that's done this enough, the certifications they get to do these air shows, it's still pretty intensive. And I do think that, you can get very good training in the civilian world. And even as military guys, we do this, from day one, you're learning formation, you're learning rejoins, you're learning all this stuff. And we still run airplanes together. It's just a tragic accident that happens. So, the biggest thing to me that stands out so far is the lack of deconfliction plan. I think that's, and again, I don't know. I don't know if that's standard and they just always kind of wing it and they just know, and, a standard plan comes together. To me, the fact that they mention it means the investigators probably expected, to hear something in the brief about a deconfliction, but I don't know. I've never done an air show. So, and it's possible. But anytime you're doing formation, anytime you're doing something with multiple formations, especially, it's nice to know that everybody has either, you don't always have to have altitude deconflictions. You can have a Beano line, so we do geographical deconfliction as well, where we put a line down the center of the airspace, for example. And if we're at the same altitude, so if we have two formations, because we use a lot of airspace, right? And we're doing a lot of maneuvering when we do red air in T-38s and, some of the other aircraft, we don't have data link. So if you put a geographical deconfliction line and say, hey, don't cross this, then that's okay. You can be at the same altitude because as long as I don't cross this line. Is that the case with a 500 and 1,000 foot? I don't think so, but I don't know. I mean, when you're talking fighter speeds, 500 feet, I mean, you can cross that in a blink of an eye. I don't see, they may come back later and say, hey, he was supposed to not cross the 500 foot line and that's what happened. Or he may have had another geographical point he wasn't supposed to go, east of. I don't know. I mean, I think an altitude deconfliction plan probably would have helped him here. And for situational awareness, knowing that he was tail end Charlie, he was the number 3 aircraft, and the B-17 guys were right behind him or were going to be in the same airspace, just enough till he goes, okay, I know they're supposed to be there. Let me do a quick belly check. Oh, crap, there they are. Let me climb. Let me G it up. Let me get away or something like that. Very tragic, but for the grace of God go I. I'll never say that it's something that I wouldn't have done, because we all make mistakes and this all happens. But I do think this will end up being some kind of human factors situation, which is just awful, avoidable and awful. The B-17 folks, I mean, sucks, especially the crew. They had no idea. And in fact, I don't know if the pilots even knew, because if you look at the impact angles and stuff on the video, it's like, I mean, they probably had no idea what happened. And that is awful. So anyway, very, very tragic mishap. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.